Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome once again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, business, arts and entertainment, who knows, anything that gets our attention. My name is Jesse Mayshark. I am co-publisher and co-founder of Compass at CompassKnox.com. I am joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing fine, Jesse. Welcome back from your trip.
Yeah, happy to be back in town, and thanks for holding down the fort while I was out and about. Well, we have actually several things to talk about this week. A varied menu, I would say. Early voting in the City of Knoxville election wrapped up, so we'll take a look at those numbers. Spoiler alert, they are low. Some interesting questions and discussion about a proposed new ambulance contract for Knox County. The City of Knoxville's varied and ongoing efforts to address the affordable housing shortage. There was some action on a couple of fronts there this week. And to start us off, I thought we would talk a little bit about a story we ran this week. A little bit of an esoteric issue, maybe, but one that has generated a fair amount of social media discussion in recent weeks and months, and that is what appear to be ongoing tensions at Three Rivers Market. Three Rivers Market is a food co-op, probably familiar to many of our listeners. It actually dates back to 1981 as a formal entity here in Knoxville, and for many years was located on North Broadway. People who have somewhat long memories, like us, can probably remember its sort of charmingly dingy old headquarters there. It's actually where now Alley Ray's restaurant and bar is there on North Broadway. And a little over a decade ago, it moved to a much bigger, brighter, new building on North Central Street at the corner of Central and Baxter. And it's really become kind of a fixture there of the North Knoxville landscape and the Happy Holler area. And, you know, the food co-op is something that I feel like for a lot of people who shop there has just been sort of like thought of as a friendly community asset. You go there, they've got a selection of healthy foods, a lot of organic produce. Especially in its earlier days, it was one of the only places in town that you could get a lot of the things that they sell. That's shifted a little bit in subsequent years as we've seen places like Earth Fare and then Whole Foods and others come into the market, and even the expansion of, organic foods. And, you can get tofu at Kroger now, you can get tempeh and so forth. But I think for a lot of people, the co-op still feels like a very, almost kind of like virtuous place to shop. And I think that one reason people shop there is that it kind of makes them feel good. They're doing something that's maybe healthy for themselves, buying healthy food. And also they sell a lot of, whether it's produce or meat and so forth, that comes from local farms, local vendors. So you feel like you're supporting, your local economy. But all of that has been shaken up a little bit over the last 18 months. And this really seems to date to the hiring of a new general manager there who came in after the former GM, Jackie Arthur, retired last year. She had been there for 21 years, and she really kind of put her stamp on the place. She was the one who kind of shepherded that whole move from their old location to their new one, and really kind of built it up into the presence that it is now. And so those were always going to be sort of, probably difficult shoes to fill. But what started earlier this year as kind of a trickle of posts on Facebook and Instagram and Reddit by a couple of people who had left as employees, raising concerns about the direction under the new general manager, really in recent weeks became kind of a torrent. There was in particular one Reddit thread. For those of you unfamiliar with Reddit, it is a social media platform full of sort of boards dedicated to lots of individual interests. And so there's one that's just the Knoxville Reddit. And on the Knoxville Reddit, you can find a thread started by an anonymous poster saying they were a former employee, and they certainly seem to have a lot of knowledge about the inner workings of the co-op, and some other then also people saying they were former employees chimed in, basically saying that the new management does not appear very committed to the literally cooperative principles that Three Rivers Market is set up under. Some people think Three Rivers is a nonprofit. It's not. It's actually a co-op, which means it's owned collectively by, in this case, its members who are basically its shoppers. So you don't have to be a co-op member to shop at Three Rivers, but if you are a member, you get discounts on goods. And from a governance standpoint, you actually can vote for members of the board of directors who set policy for the direction of the store, and also that board of directors is responsible for hiring the general manager, but it stays out of the day-to-day operations. And so as people have started to raise these concerns, which again you can read more about in our coverage from this past week, there's been, I think, a little bit of a sense among membership of a disconnect between the concerns that they're hearing from employees and the position of the board, which has been a little bit hands-off. The board's response so far has been to kind of reiterate their existing policies that they have in terms of evaluating the performance of the manager, but also to emphasize that the board does not get involved in, hiring or firing people or sort of the day-to-day operations there. And so there's been allegations of, kind of just a more recriminatory atmosphere at the store. Several current and former employees told us that, they feel that there's a fear of retaliation if they raise concerns about anything being done in the store. And we did reach out both to the board and to the current general manager for comment on all of this. The board just kind of sent a statement, which was basically the statement they had already issued to members. The general manager did not, who a lot of this seems to revolve around, did not return requests for comment. So it's hard to get a complete picture of everything happening there, but there has been, what we can say for sure, there's been a tremendous amount of turnover there since the new management took over. Almost all of the department heads who were there under the former GM have gone in the last 18 months. Some of them quit. One of them actually died of an illness. And there's just been basically everybody who's kind of running the departments there now are not the people who were running the departments 18 months ago, and in a lot of cases are people who were not even at the store 18 months ago. So a lot of loss of institutional knowledge there about how the store operates, and also kind of what co-op principles really mean. And, the co-op is set up not just to be sort of another grocery store, but also to provide community benefits and to be a model of democratic governance by its members. There's a whole set of principles on their website that you can read. And one of the major concerns raised is that the new management doesn't seem too knowledgeable or committed to those principles. The new general manager had never worked at a co-op before, did have grocery experience at Earth Fare stores and at a Dollar General market in Seymour, which was the most recent place he worked before being hired in at the co-op. And so, on the one hand, Scott, this very much seems like a sort of tempest in a teapot, especially if you're somebody who doesn't shop at or care about Three Rivers Market. I mean, sort of what could be more esoteric than the internal politics of a food co-op in North Knoxville. But on the other hand, for people who do care about it and have been committed to it for many years, it really is a community institution that people feel very real ownership of, with good reason. Because if you're a member, you literally are a co-owner of it. And members are starting to raise concerns. There will be a meeting of the board of directors this coming week that we hope to go to and kind of hear what issues get raised there and what's said about it. There is also an election going on among members this month for some of the open seats on the board, and that includes one candidate who we talked to for one of those seats, Adam Hughes, who is running partly because of these concerns and saying he wants to make sure that there is a voice for workers and employees on the board, that vendors have some more voice in kind of what's going on at the market. So, I think it does raise sort of interesting questions about what and who a food co-op is really for.
Yeah, well, one thing about a co-op is it is a community-owned asset. It's a and therefore it's much more symbolic or representative of the community than most other grocery stores.
Yeah,
and even it's a if there when a grocery store the quality of it perceives to diminish or moves or whatever, a traditional supermarket, the community doesn't like it. Sometimes they think it's less convenient for them. In some places, it can even create a food desert. But a co-op is a little different because of the structure and the people who own it. So it actually has a greater symbolic value, even to people who don't shop there. And
I think that's absolutely true.
And so and so I think a lot of people are very interested in the internal politics of the co-op, and I know that we've gotten quite a few people have commented to us about this about the story, and it's like any other. I mean, because it's community owned, it is or member owned. It is a little bit more public and a little bit more. People feel like they have more of it, and they do actually have. It's not they just feel it; they do have more of a stake in its success than they would at a regular supermarket, a supermarket chain. So it's going to get a lot more scrutiny. It's going to get and people are going to be passionate about it, and they are.
Yeah, and it does have these adopted explicit principles, one of which is concern for the community. And, that's not something most grocery stores have. Now, most grocery stores would probably tell you, oh, yes, we're here to serve the community. But that's not going to keep them from shutting down a store if it's not making money or whatever. At a certain level, you just expect sort of big chain grocery stores to make decisions that probably much more reflect the interests of the corporation than the community, and that's not true with the food co-op. So we will see what happens there, but definitely an interesting issue. And as you say, I mean, of recent stories that we've had, I think we've had, and this may reflect the nature of our own Compass readership too, which I think includes a lot of co-op shoppers, but we have received a lot of interest and comment on the story, and we certainly will continue to write about it. Another issue that has received ongoing comment from many quarters of the community is the question of affordable housing. And Scott, we've talked about this in a lot of different ways here before, and it's one of these things we kind of keep writing about and our local governments keep wrestling with. But you kind of took a look this week at kind of pulling together, because it can take a lot of different forms. And so the City of Knoxville took a couple of actions this week that really just help reflect and illuminate those efforts.
Yeah. There were three things that happened, and they all had to do with one part of affordable housing, the city's approach to affordable housing, which is again part of a broader approach to housing in general, because the housing shortage in the city is really it's driving up rents, it's driving up home costs, sales costs. It is just it is the major issue confronting the city right now. And one of the things, the tools the city has is the Affordable Rental Housing Fund, and it goes to it helps fund projects that provide rental housing for people, and that is the primary goal, is affordable rental housing. And it was kind of interesting. They had a groundbreaking at a complex called Callahan Flats, which is in North Knoxville on Callahan Drive, and it's, or Callahan Road, and it's going to provide 88 apartments. 50 of them are affordable, or are for permanent supportive housing. So it's going to be which is supposedly, that goes to address the homeless situation, because permanent supportive housing is for people who were formerly homeless, much like Flanagan Landing in South Knoxville and Minville Manor on Fifth Avenue. And in fact, the company that is, or the nonprofit that is building this, is Knoxville Leadership Foundation. Their Southeastern Housing Foundation manages Flanagan Landing, and they are building this and will manage it. And it was actually funded. A lot of city money went into this particular project. About $900,000 from the Affordable Rental Housing Fund, which is basically city cash that goes to the developer to help them develop and a project. And they also provided $2.9 million from the federal COVID relief money that came in. So there's quite a bit of city support for this particular project, and they had, like I said, they had the groundbreaking be open in a couple of years. It was funded from last year's pool of money. This year's pool of money in the Affordable Rental Housing Fund is $2.5 million. That's out of $7.5 million to go toward housing in general, but $2.5 million for the Affordable Rental Housing Fund. It all went in one fell swoop to two different projects from the same developer, the Dominion Group, which was, people will probably think that name sounds familiar. That was the same organization that was going to build affordable housing in the Choteau area of southwest Knox County, and was a relatively affluent area, and community opposition to the affordable housing project there caused them to withdraw that proposal. So. But they're going great guns in the city, and they proposed two developments. One of them called Grosvenor Square, which is on Merchant Drive in Norwood, and it's going to be 184 units, and 59 of those go to very low income families. Then another one called Riverside at Holston, which is next to Holston River Park in East Knoxville, and it's going to have 96 units, and 25 of those will be for very low income families. The Grosvenor Square gets $1.75 million from the Affordable Rental Housing Fund. Riverside at Holston gets $750,000. And it's kind of interesting. They got, the fiscal year just began in July, and here they spent all their money on this, but Kevin DuBose, who's the housing director for the city, explained to me that they have to, because these projects have to be funded so far in advance, and one of the key elements to the financing of these projects are low-income housing tax credits. Developers have to apply for those in the fall, so they have to have the other financing in place to apply for those. So it's routine that the Affordable Rental Housing Fund money gets appropriated early in the fiscal year, even though groundbreaking might not be for a while, as in the case of Callahan Flats, which was, as I said, appropriated last year. But these projects are the financing is very complicated. In addition to the low income housing tax credits, they have loans that they have to go get from banks. They get sometimes get federal grants to help pay for them. They typically get payment in lieu of tax agreements with the city and the county, and those unlike straight up subsidies or incentives to developers, they don't even have to come to city council because they are for affordable housing projects. So they get automatically added into them. But they need to put these packages in place more than a year ahead of time. So and that's one thing that a lot of people might not understand and might want to know, well, why doesn't the city build more and more affordable housing? Well, they can, and they have, and I asked Kevin DuBose if is there a waiting list for developers and projects? He said no. So we basically give this money out as we get proposals for them.
Right.
So.
Well, because as you say, these are complicated projects to build. There are not that many local developers who are really looking to build these kinds of projects.
No.
Most of our local developers are looking to build market rate housing for sort of obvious reasons. It's easier to make money.
It's easier. Well, it's easier to make money, and one of the reasons it's easier to make money is you can go. You could just go to the instead of the putting together these puzzles of financing that have all these different parts. You just go to a bank. You get a loan. You show them how much you're going to charge in rent. And they'll give you a loan, and you can cover. If you can cover that, then there you go. And it's just one loan, one bank. You go break ground. It's not. So your sources of income are basically that loan and any equity you have in the property.
And you're not locked into any particular rental rate.
Right. Either. If something happens with the cost of construction and it goes up, you can just say, "Oh, I'll just charge $500 more a month, and that'll cover it." And you can't do that with an affordable housing project. So
a quick question here: you just mentioned Chodo and how the very wealthy property owners out there successfully rallied to stop that project. These two projects you're talking about are in middle to lower income areas. Was there any community or neighborhood opposition to either of them?
Nope, not one. Not one person spoke out against it. Either project, and not one in Callahan Flats with the that I'm aware. I don't recall anyone being opposed to it when it was proposed. The last time it came before City Council was in the spring. Callahan Flats, of course, it's in a commercial corridor. You wouldn't think that there would be a whole lot of opposition there.
Right. Merchant Drive isn't exactly anybody's idea of but a quiet little community that needs to be preserved.
But the Dominion Group did hold meetings with area residents in both of those areas. The city council members from both of those areas came. Gwen McKenzie at Holston and which is actually a pretty nice area of that's a pretty nice area of East Knoxville. It's kind of south of Holston Hills itself.
Holston River Park is a beautiful park.
It is a
if
beautiful
people haven't
park.
Been there, I highly recommend to visit.
The demographics of the people that live closest to it would you'd think that they're middle class, upper middle class residents in Holston Hills. So. But there was no opposition there. The Norwood area, where this is the Grove Center Square project is going in, is a pretty solidly middle class area. There was no opposition from there. Charles Thomas, who's the council member who represented, spoke glowingly of the project. And one thing about the project in Norwood that I neglected to mention is it's on a large, about 25-acre piece of property, but it's the backside of it's hilly and forested. And what they're planning to do there is donate that back part of the property. Looks to be a little bit more than half the property. Donate that to Legacy Parks Foundation for them to either turn into a park or just preserve as green space. As kind of a community give back, but yeah, there was no real opposition. The only person to speak at Tuesday's city council meeting was one of the founders of the tenants union that formed here, and she spoke in favor of both of them. And applauded the city's efforts to build more affordable housing. But this is one of the things that we were talking about the financing from the developer's point of view, and this is one of the things that city officials love to point out is that it's a minimal investment from the city that leverages a lot of revenue or a lot of investment from the developer, the private sector developer who actually builds and manages this property. Right now, about $1 if for every dollar of city tax money that goes into these projects, $14 of private sector money or other sources is invested in these properties. So city officials like to really tout the bang for the buck that the city tax dollars get out of this. And one other thing about affordable housing that came up in all this, and Mayor India Kincannon kind of she kind of teased this, and it's a term that I'd been unfamiliar with that is actually not new, just my ignorance. And it's what's called NOAA, and it refers to naturally occurring affordable housing. Well, which is an odd term because it's not natural at all. It's housing that's been built, but it is basically it's an acronym or a phrase for older, cheaper apartment buildings. And most of the affordable, quote unquote affordable apartment buildings in Knoxville are existing private sector, units. They've been here since the 50s and 60s into the 70s. They're relatively cheap compared to new units, and they're all over the city. One of the things is, in a market like this, developers are it's very easy to see them being tempted into renovating those buildings and raising rents because they can get people in there. They don't have to leave them as a low income or a workforce development or workforce housing type range. They can really crank it up if they do some renovations, and some of that's happened. So this is a affordable housing stock, and to prevent that from eroding further, the city is looking at coming up with some sort of incentive package for the owners of these properties, not the builders of new developments, the owners of these properties, where they haven't given details on it, but it's obviously going to have to be something along the lines of some kind of incentive that these developers get in exchange for keeping the rents low.
Right, where they could renovate and bring up to modern standards some of these units, but still keep them at the affordable level that they're at now.
Right, and that incentive would enable them to do that without, they're still going to be making, they're still going to be able to put money in their pocket, but they're not going to have to do it at the, at the expense of the renters.
Right,
and so we don't know exactly what form that's going to take at this point. They're going to be announcing something on that in the next couple of weeks, and they'll be bringing something to City Council for that. And but that is to the goal there is to have we've got this large stock, and I'm sure that they will come out with the kind of estimate of the amount of units they have. We've got several in the neighborhood where I live. I'm I'm a block away from one of these units and one of these developments, and so the potential there for and this is kind of the putting your finger in the dike part of the affordable housing question. And it's
right. You don't want to lose what you already have,
right? And that's what the fear is, that will continue especially since the market's so hot.
Right. All right. Well, so NOAA, that's a phrase we're going to be hearing
NOAA,
more.
yes.
Okay. Last week, when I wasn't here, Scott talked a bit about the new proposed ambulance contract for Knox County. As you may recall, there were 4 companies who bid for that contract, and the recommendation from the county's evaluation committee was to award it to the existing contractor, American Medical Response, AMR, which is the largest private ambulance company in the country. And this week, there was a public hearing on that, really an informational meeting. I shouldn't say it was a public hearing because there was not a public forum or public comment. This was for county commissioners to get information about the proposed contract from members of Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs' administration and from AMR themselves, now that they are the designated awardee. County Commission is supposed to be voting on that contract later this month. And so I think this meeting, the idea behind it was to maybe have all the conversation or a lot of the conversation about the contract now, rather than having long drawn out debates at the commission workshop and meeting, although I'm sure there will still be discussion of it there. What was interesting to me about this meeting was that there was a great deal of skepticism among the county commissioners who were there. There were 6 out of the 11 commissioners were in attendance at the hearing on Thursday. And basically, their questions really came down to there have been a lot of issues with ambulance service under the existing contract, which, again, is already being provided by AMR. They have really struggled to meet the mandated response times in that contract. They have struggled to maintain, enough staff to have enough ambulances on the road. And they have also struggled very much with the problem of prolonged waiting times at local hospital emergency rooms, which can tie up ambulances for hours so that they can't get back on the road. And basically, Commissioner Larson J. just kind of point blank asked them, you're already doing this, you're already having problems. Why should we believe that if we just give you the new contract, you're going to do any better? And also a couple of commissioners had concerns with the response times designated in the new contract. One thing the new contract does is it splits up the county. Under the current contract, basically the county is just, for response times, the county is just seen as a whole, and they are expected to respond within 17 minutes, 90% of the time, to all of their calls, and that's what they've been struggling to do. Under the new one, it splits up the county into 3 districts. Basically, the city of Knoxville, kind of the urban core, where about 2/3 of their calls come from right now. And then the areas outside the county are split into, or outside the city, into a West County district and an East County district. And in those areas, basically, the contract within the city, the contract would require a response of within 10 minutes to any priority 1 call, which those are your real life-threatening emergencies, heart attacks, strokes, etc. Outside that central city area, that response time mandate would be 20 minutes. And county officials who drew up the contract and the consultant who helped them do that said that that's really just a reflection of reality in a county as big as Knox County. To have any kind of affordable ambulance system, that ambulance system is going to have to concentrate their resources where most of the calls come from. And again, that is within the urban center, the most densely populated part of the county. And so there it makes sense to have a 10-minute response time because you can basically have, a station. It's not that hard to locate an ambulance station in the middle of the city that can respond to any place within the city within 10 minutes, especially when you're running lights and going fast. But outside the city, it gets much harder. It's a big county. So saying that you're going to be able to get to Coreyton or Concord in 10 minutes or Bonnie Kate, that's a much different proposition. And so, but they say that by designating those districts, actually you're going to be mandating better service outside the city as well, because under the current contract, that 17-minute response time is basically an average across the whole county, which means if you're doing a whole lot of 7-minute responses in the city, that can kind of cover up for 25-minute responses to those outlying areas. But when you have a 20-minute mandate outside the city, that's saying that, no, you can't have a 25-minute response to Coreyton. You have to get there in 20 minutes. So the argument is that this is actually going to ensure better response outside the city. As you might imagine, commissioners who represent areas mostly outside the city were not totally sold on this. And the idea that you're formally going to say to them, okay, you have 20 minutes to respond to a heart attack in Hardin Valley, for example, doesn't give Hardin Valley residents a great deal of comfort, because that sounds like kind of a long time if you're having a heart attack or a stroke. But I think the counter argument that the county officials and that AMR officials themselves made at the meeting was that, that's just that basically if you wanted to have a 10-minute response time anywhere in the county, you'd have to have a tremendously higher number of ambulances and staff, and that would cost more money. One of the interesting things about this new contract is that it is actually going to cost the county a direct payment of, to start out with, about $2.1 million a year. Under the existing contract, the county's not spending anything. The ambulance company is supposed to make its money just on billing patients for the transport. They will still be doing that under the new contract, but that $2 million a year is their estimated level that it will take for them to basically turn a profit and not be operating at a loss as they have been in some recent years, because they just can't make enough money just billing the patients themselves. Part of the reason for that is the demographics of who actually calls for ambulances. 70% of all ambulance transports across the whole county are Medicare or Medicaid patients, which is not a surprise. Medicare patients are basically everybody over 65, and as we know, our older population consumes disproportionately a tremendous amount of our healthcare resources. They are the people who most often call ambulances, but those ambulance reimbursement rates are set by Medicare and they're low. And so it's just hard for an ambulance service to make money on serving a population where 70% of them are paying those government mandated rates. Another 20% are people who aren't Medicare or Medicaid, but don't have any insurance. So they're what you call cash payers. And what that actually means a lot of time is cash non-payers, and because they just can't afford to pay for it. A lot of that ends up getting written off. Only about 10% of the people who call ambulances have private insurance that is not government set, that is not Medicaid or Medicare. So they will pay higher rates, whatever their private insurance company rates are. But again, that's only 10% of your total calls. So the argument is that, like, basically and this is what the consultants said, this is true across the country, you kind of can't run a private for-profit ambulance service and make money without some level of direct public subsidy. So that's what this contract is going to provide. But again, just a lot of questions and concerns from commissioners about it. There were also questions about, the fact that AMR is owned by a large investment firm, KKR, which is sort of notorious for taking a cost-cutting approach to generating profits. And that's another thing that Commissioner Jay said was, how do we know that if AMR, gets in financial trouble, they have a huge debt load. If they get in financial trouble, how do we know that KKR isn't going to do what they have done in a lot of other industries, where they just try to squeeze profits out of anything they can, which is mostly by cutting costs, which could result in, lower service levels and so forth. The AMR officials said, no, we're going to meet the contract. We are going to, our debt load is kind of a separate issue from our ongoing operating expenses, that this contract will allow us to operate in a, sustainable way. I don't know that commissioners have a lot of great options in this case. I mean, they could, if they wanted to, vote down the contract and send the county out to rebid it or to look at one of the other bidders, but a lot of these issues are really industry-wide issues that are not necessarily going to be able to be solved just by choosing a different bidder.
Well, there's also a timing issue.
Yeah, and there's a timing issue,
because if they turn it down, the current contract ends January 31st, I believe.
Right. Well, the current contract actually ended already.
Yeah,
it's operating under sort of an emergency extension to January 31st. to give them time to get a new contract. And so,
Well, to expect first of all, to reject AMR if they do, then to expect AMR to stick around after January 31st out of the goodness of their heart is a little bit, I would think you could characterize that as naive.
It would be a hard sell.
It definitely would be. And so they do, they're kind of over a barrel on whether to approve or not, for good or ill.
And some commissioners definitely expressed frustration with that, feeling like they're being put, in a real bind. But I think that the most likely thing I think we're going to see is some continued questions, and there may be some proposals to add, some particular provisions to the contract. We'll have to see. Of course, if commission does try to do that, that would still have to be then negotiated with AMR to see if those things would be acceptable to them. But it seems like a lot of what they're trying to do is send a strong message to AMR that they haven't been happy with the level of service that has been provided under the current contract, whatever the reasons for it, even if they are things to some degree out of AMR's control, and that they're going to be watching closely, because this is a very, very important thing to people, that when a crisis strikes, which of course nobody wants to happen and nobody wants to imagine is going to happen to them, but if it does happen to you, people want to feel like if you call 911, that ambulance is going to be there in a timely manner, and it can very much be a literal matter of life and death. So there will be continued discussion of this, I'm sure, at commission's meetings this month, and we'll see if they go ahead and vote to approve it and under what conditions. But it was a really interesting, and I think you got the sense in that meeting, or I did anyway, that county commissioners were very much taking their role in this seriously. They did not want their vote to approve this contract to be taken for granted by anybody. So, of course, more to come on that. Also this week, early voting in the city election, which is still going on, even though people may have somewhat forgotten about it, or judging by the numbers, may not even know it's going on. It is going on. It wrapped up on Thursday. And Scott, we expected that this was going to be a low turnout election. Of course, the actual election day is still next week, so we'll see more votes then. But the early voting numbers have kind of borne that out. Yeah,
now there was a surge toward the end of early voting, which ended last Thursday. The last few days, a lot more people came out to vote than early on, but that's pretty normal. About 6,500, a little bit less than 6,500 people voted in person for early voting. Another close to 800 people have sent in absentee ballots. So far, the turnout is about the early voting in-person turnout is 20% lower than it was in the primary, which was pretty bad. And it tends to be about half of the overall vote. In the primary, we wound up having the city wound up having a little bit more than 16,000 people who voted. It was about 16.2% of the pool of eligible voters. This time, it's looking to be about 13,000, if that holds true. We had about 6,500 vote early, another 6,500 vote on election day. And you're getting down to you're flirting with just 10%. I mean, it's only 13% of the vote. So it's
and the mayor's race, of course, is not on the ballot in the general election. So we kind of expected that the general election would have lower turnout than the primary.
Yeah, that was expected. In fact, a lot of people who I talked to who follow elections closely were concerned it would be even lower. But it's still low. I mean, either way you go, it's 13% turnout or 15% turnout or 18% turnout is still, those are all low numbers. And this is going to be around 13% probably, unless something really bizarre happens. As we pointed out in the early voting during the primary, there are people who, the biggest turnout is among West Knoxville voters. The second district, which is most of West Knoxville on either side of Kingston Pike, from UT on out, is they counted. There were 2,200 people who voted, close to that, and they accounted for a third of the people who voted.
Mm-hmm.
When you add the Northwest Knoxville district, the third district, West Knoxville accounts for half of the early vote.
Right.
So those are the areas that really came out. West Knoxville traditionally votes a little heavier than other parts of the city. That's true. And again, once again, we have folks like you and me, people who are older, who are overwhelmingly driving turnout. There are fewer than 600 people aged 34 or younger who voted in the early so far. And the rest, it's almost 6,000 or so voted, or is 6,000 or so voted, were over 34.
And the majority are over 55.
The majority are over 55, yeah. 5,300 are over 55. So it's...
well, I'm only 54, so I still count as one of the younger voters.
You young whippersnapper.
I did take my 19-year-old son to vote, I will say, and I told him he's probably one of about a half dozen 19-year-olds in the city of Knoxville who cast a ballot.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. It's turnout among young people. It's historically been low, but it's dismal.
Yeah, most of the 19-year-olds in Knoxville don't have a local political reporter as a dad.
Yeah,
who makes them get off the couch and go down to do it. Well, of course.
But anyway, so we've got so that's over. Or election day is Tuesday. We've got 2 competitive city council races, and 2 city council members who are running unopposed, and the municipal judge race that are all on the ballot. And you can go to the Election Commission website, knoxvotes.org, and look at sample ballot. If you have not yet voted, you can look up your precinct and see where you need to go vote on Tuesday. And certainly hope that that more people turn out on election day and make a mockery of my projection of the turnout.
I want to interrupt real quick. There is the election coverage you guys have still outside the paywall for people if they're on their last chance of checking stuff out?
Yes, you can find that on our website, CompassKnox.com.
If you don't know who to vote for yet, you have a place to learn more about who to vote for while you're at it too.
That's right. Thanks for the promotion, Seth. Appreciate it. Yeah, I actually, speaking of those unopposed races, I ran into my own city council member, Charlie Thomas, down at Old City Java this morning. I went ahead and just congratulated him on his reelection. Yeah. Even though election day is not till Tuesday, he didn't have an opponent in either the primary or the general, and he said he's got his fingers crossed.
Yeah,
he's gonna get a second term.
It was funny. I took a look at the there's a pre-general financial disclosure form that has to be filed by the candidates. It had to be filed on Halloween this year. It's just for the month of October. But it's the kind of the last up to the last minute, up to date figures that they had. It's almost all spending. Most of them had already raised the money they were going to raise, and it was a matter of spending what they had. And Charlie Thomas and Lynn Fugit, who is also unopposed in her race for her at-large seat. For some reason, neither one of them raised money or spent money, not one dime during the month of October. So
it's nice to be unopposed.
I got a chuckle to myself when I was going through all those numbers. I said, well, those are of the what of the 10 candidates or the 10 possible candidates you could have, only almost half of those I didn't have to worry about.
Yep.
I didn't have to look at. So,
yep. Well, certainly we will have coverage of the actual election and results and all of that next week. Now we are up to our interview segment. We actually haven't had an interview on the show for a while. We've been so busy, it's been hard to schedule them, but a couple of people have said, hey, you guys need to do more interviews. And we said, all right, we will. And this week, Scott, we talked to City Councilman Tommy Smith.
Yeah, Smith is he represents the South Knoxville and the UT Fort Sanders area. So we talked to him about all things waterfront, urban wilderness, pedestrian bridge, and other topics about the goings on in South Knoxville primarily, and it was a good time. He was Smith is a pretty insightful person who tries to keep track of the things that are going on in his district, and it's a really good interview, and it's one of those things where you think you know everything about South Knoxville, but you might not necessarily do so. So it was good to talk with him, and you can listen to it now. Our guest this week is Tommy Smith, who is the city council member representing the 1st District, that is South Knoxville and the UT Fort Sanders area. Quite a diverse range of communities, from the most densely populated area of the city to Vestal, to the South Waterfront, urban wilderness. Welcome. Tommy.
Thank you.
Yes.
You covered a lot of the corners of the first. Good. Well done.
And Chapman Highway. You can't forget Chapman Highway. It
the
is
spine. That's
the
right.
spine of South Knoxville.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Glad you could join us. And so let's dive into things South Knoxville. What do you see as the biggest things that have happened in the South Knoxville area in the last couple of months, and look forward to the next couple of months?
Well, I would say maybe if I would extend the question a little bit to a couple of years, I would say the same thing applies to a couple of months, which is more pedestrian park connections and more people moving to South Knoxville. I guess those are the two big things I see, and with that comes excitement for all the reasons people are moving here, and change anxiety for the people who are already here. So the best way I can handle those things is I go to almost every neighborhood meeting almost every month and listen to folks and make sure I'm aware of how things are resonating, what's around the corner. A lot of people just want to feel, be aware and have some say in something that's coming around the corner. So, with change, I'm always trying to stay ahead of what questions they're going to have and stay informed as much as possible, and then work with the administration to make sure the thing lands the way people who live here want it to land.
Well, speaking of change, that is coming. Part of it definitely coming. Some of it perhaps is coming. Is the University of Tennessee and the city through KCDC have bought property.
Yeah,
South Waterfront. It is can be used as the landing spot in South Knoxville for the pedestrian bridge that has been proposed between there and the University of Tennessee campus. And one of the things that they talk about is that's going to be regardless of whether the bridge is there or not, that's going to be a mixed-use development of some sort. Mm-hmm. So what have you
learned about that project, and what are you hearing from the people that live in the Blunt Avenue, Scottish Pike area of the waterfront about it?
Well, I mentioned the first thing I mentioned was about people moving here, and I think that's important for a bunch of reasons. And you also mentioned, Scott, even if the bridge doesn't happen, I actually think that's one of the best ways to understand, at least the way that I've come to understand the opportunity ahead. So there's, if you think about it, the South Waterfront Vision Plan was created more than 17 years ago. It called for mixed use, commercial, trail connections, public parks, pedestrian infrastructure, missing middle housing before, we as a city called it that. And then connections to the rest of the city and local businesses. All that's kind of jam-packed in the plan. And it's for the whole South Waterfront. And it just so happened that the east side of Chapman kicked off along Sevier faster than Blunt and Scottish Pike. So I start there because it's important that everybody remember what's part of those. And while some things have changed, and housing prices and, the pandemic and a bunch of things, those same dynamics are still desired by people of South Knoxville that were here. They are still the same dynamics that cause, or the same elements of South Knoxville that make people move here. So I think that vision plan is important because if you think about it, all of those people, all those pieces are important, but they're kind of like Jenga in the sense that if you start to change and pull away, foundational pieces, it looks more like a sum of parts as opposed to a cohesive corridor. And so it's a little long-winded, and I'll take a deep breath and keep going a little bit longer if it's okay. And the reason I say that is because that vision plan is the starting place. And so, things change, and so you need to be able to adapt. But if you think about it, what does all of that call for? It calls for over 1,000 new people to live over there. When I say over there, I mean we're talking on the west side of Chapman Highway down the Blunt, Scottish Pike. So if you've got a vision plan that calls for a lot of pedestrian infrastructure, bridge or no bridge, you're going to have more than 1,000 new people live there in the matter of, let's call it 2 or 3 years. And the thing that's unique about this side of Chapman is that it's pinned in by 3 tunnels, right? So if you think about one of the things I hear from people, you ask on Scottish Pike and Blunt Avenue is, what do you hear? What I hear most is, we like what's going on in Sevier. We want that over here. So if you think about it that way, as kind of a consistent comment, how do you do that? Well, you have the same recipes of the vision plan and the zone that allows that, but it's not hemmed in by 3 tunnels. If you think about Sevier Avenue, and it's, a lot of the condos and apartments are still being built over there. If that was a half mile and it was pinned in by 3 tunnels, you'd have a problem. And so if this is the least sexiest version, by the way, of why the pedestrian bridge, I think makes sense, but it's the most practical. If you have more than, let's call it 1,000 to 2,000 new residents over the course of 3 years, and there's no infrastructure to kind of act as a release valve, you've got a lot of cool places to live and sleep, but you can't get in and out of there without a nightmare. So practically speaking, infrastructure to allow traffic to get up from Blunt Avenue up to Chapman Highway, across from Kearns, for example, and a release valve of a pedestrian bridge that not only allows people to use their car less, it might be the best place other than downtown or campus proper where people might live without a car at all. So if you think about it, how do I have 1,000 to 2,000 new residents in a small corridor with all this fun, wonderful things that's cohesive and connected and not kind of pieces and parts, but a full community without a congestion nightmare? You got to have some pedestrian infrastructure and fewer cars, more people playing, purchasing, and living without driving everywhere. So that's a mouthful, but that's kind of that's a full understanding. There's more to say, but that's one view on it.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned is the connectivity to Chapman Highway. I know, when you come down Blunt Avenue from Chapman Highway, you have the railroad overpass, which is essentially which is one lane, and that's a real choke point going there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I know some discussions are being made about making a better use of the connection that's a little bit further south, like you said, across from Kern's Bakery, down Hawthorne Avenue to the
Augusta.
South.
Yeah.
Is that what you think?
Yeah.
Is the vision of where the primary access point should be?
Yes. And I do think, just the tunnels aren't moving as much as we feel like we have the ability to chart our own destination. Railroad tunnels are harder to move than most things. So, yes, they're through better pedestrian and traffic car access to Chapman up through. I think it's Ford. I can't remember the name of the road, but yeah, it comes across from Wendy's there. Yeah, at the red light. That's one. And I do think people are already starting to see new rooftops change in Vestal. People will want to live in that neighborhood as well. It's only a half a mile to a mile away from the river. And just this week, in that corner of Ogle and Maryville Pike, a new building has got a new owner, and so I think we think of the South Waterfront. A lot of folks think of it in terms of its official zoning, but it extends quickly into neighborhoods that have been around a long time. And on that note, one of the things that's important to know is the amount of people that came to weigh in on the South Waterfront vision plan originally wasn't just limited to people in Old Sevier, Island Home, and neighborhoods that abut the river. It was all of South Knoxville and beyond. So what's important to me is that those people be brought back to the table. So what I've asked the city to do, and their agreement with, is to bring kind of an advocacy and advisory committee back up for the South Waterfront, because as things go and change, we do need to get continual input formally to say, how's it going? What direction does that need to head? And so in the meantime, what I've asked is for those neighborhoods to say, all right, the feedback has been kind of twofold. One is, here are the things we want that are new, bridge or no bridge, but here are the things we want. If the bridge does happen, we want it to land well. We want it to be additive to the community. And the other things are, what are the things we want to mitigate? Like, what are the things we don't want to have happen? And how can we plan for both of those? And there's a few things that have they've kind of articulated. There's about 7 or 8 of them, but I'll try to remember most of them. One is public spaces along the Tennessee River. So in the same way we have Suttree Landing, similar small, medium parks along there. There's green space just up on the ridge that Aslan Foundation has saved and secured, and as has Legacy Park. So tying into those. A contiguous river walk, boardwalk along the river. So that's part of the code that requires any new development along the river to do that. But, there are questionable areas where the city is going to have to step in and make sure that the boardwalk continues. Using any existing sites as much as possible, even for temporary kind of pop-up events or use. That's one of the reasons people love Sevier Avenue, is because it's not all shiny new buildings. It's human scale character, building size in old buildings. People love the charm of that. Public recreation on the north side of the river. So, a lot of the discussion that I hear is about student population coming and living on the South Waterfront. Well, there needs to be a reason for the people in South Knoxville, I think, to want to access a public space on the north side of the river. So as UT re-envisions where that bridge might land, a park that with more amenities that, myself or others would want to walk across to, in addition to sports and other things, and just going to Clarence Brown every once in a while, I think is important. I mentioned some of the traffic congestion. That's super important to mitigate that and make sure it's not a parking lot community. Affordable housing incentives. That's another thing I've heard very clear is that I think the displacement on the Sevier Avenue side has been minimal. And I think that has to do a lot with the human scale buildings and the retrofitting kind of redevelopment of those buildings and other things. But how do we build in any affordable housing? If the city offers an incentive at all in any way, shape, or form, whether it's TIF dollars or pilots, affordable housing of a substantial amount has to be a part of that. So I think making sure it's still affordable for new residents and existing residents alike. And the other one I'm thinking is, Goose Creek. Goose Creek comes through Vestal and the CRE report that you all are familiar with, the consultants that came in. I think one of the ideas they had is a good one, which is to invest in sustaining Goose Creek by making it special kind of confluence at the Tennessee River. So anyways, those are the things that I've heard consistently that either add new amenities that are public accessible to the people that live there or try to prevent some unintended consequences.
So moving away from the waterfront and going back to that spine that you were talking about with Chapman Highway, obviously that has been the topic of discussion for many years about various kinds of improvements, making it safer for cars, making it safer for people on foot and so forth. What's this? I know there have been studies, task force, so forth. TDOT has been involved at various points. What's the status of any efforts to make real improvements to safety along the Chapman Highway corridor?
I don't have a good answer for that. I wish I had a better one. I've been, anytime I see our state legislators, I mention it. It's on the TPO priority list for. They do it every few years, it's on the top list for those. I don't know. I think it's a good excuse to have our Senator Becky Massey on the podcast and answer. She's the chair as you know, she's the chair of the Transportation Committee. So if anybody knows the real answer, it would be her. Sorry to punt, but I don't know.
No. Well, and I think that's often been a challenge for people who live in South Knoxville, just to understand whose court that ball is even on, really.
Yeah. And you all might know this, but I thought for certain that in addition to the governor's funding for an expedited lane, I can't remember the proper name for it, but I thought there was additional funding as well to expedite projects like that have been kind of on backlog. I don't know what it takes 15, 20 years to do a single project. So I don't remember what it was called, but I thought there was an extra package of money that was meant to boost the speed of these projects.
Yeah, there was extra money included. And I don't actually remember, Scott, if we've seen a breakdown yet of where that money is actually going to be allocated.
No, I don't think we have. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I don't think we've seen seen how that's going to be divvied up across the state and project by project. If it exists yet, sometimes or not sometimes, almost all the time, the road building bureaucracy moves about as slowly as road building itself.
Yeah.
So, it takes forever to. That's why proposals have to get put on the waiting list, and the waiting list is years and years out, and by the time it comes around, people have forgotten why they needed the road in the first place.
Yeah.
One thing, and this is a little bit kind of going back to what we were talking about, but it also could involve Chapman Highway, because Chapman Highway does basically divide South Knoxville into two parts. But the big amenity picture in South Knoxville is you've got the waterfront and you've got the urban wilderness. And what do you see as what's needed to connect those two more. Where I know Fort Dickerson's right by, right overlooking the west side of the waterfront, but what do you see as really being needed to connect those two to where there's kind of a seamless experience?
The good news is that the city doesn't have to lead all of it. It's just very rare. I imagine other communities have this, but we're just lucky to have two mayors that get it. And you have all these organizations like the Aslan Foundation and Legacy Parks that, are equally happy to pick up the torch and run. So the rail trail that Legacy Parks is raising money for, that runs parallel to the waterfront, is a good example of that. That will go, phase one, I think, from Chapman Highway all the way to Island Home Avenue is one example of that. A trail from so you mentioned UT and Aslan and the city joining forces through KCDC to acquire the land where the bridge might land. If that's an entire park that surrounds that, it's easy to get up to Fort Dickerson and the other park up on the ridge. I can't think of the name of it, but those are two perfect examples actually of how you connect waterfront green space to the rest of the trail system. We've also, maybe you knew, there's a private landowner who donated a trail through Legacy Parks, an easement down from Fort Dickerson into Vestal. So you could walk, right now, today, you can walk from Fort Dickerson all the way to the main town center in Vestal at Ogle Avenue and Martin Mill. So by trail. So I think that's a good example. If I were to pivot a little bit further away from the river, the Lancaster sidewalk that is open now, I think there's a ribbon cutting tomorrow for it. That's amazing because it does all kinds of things. Super important is that it not only allows you to walk from the intersection where Roundup and Sono Taco is all the way down to Baker Creek. It connects also back to the urban wilderness main entrance. The cat connection is amazing. If you live at Young High Flats in an apartment along Chapman Highway and Young High, if you live there, as of today, you can, and with Cat Reimagine, it'll be even more frequent. You can, it's close to Southville Middle School. It's within the 1 mile boundary. And so kids are having to figure out how to get to school because the school bus didn't come. Because the city bus is free, because there's now a sidewalk, because the Greenway connects all of that. If you're, a sixth grader at Southville Middle School and live at Young High Flats, you can ride from there on the Cat bus for free, get off onto a sidewalk, either walk the Greenway or walk the sidewalk all the way to the middle school, and you can do all that within 15, 20 minutes. Providing that to residents in exchange for collective tax dollars, with parks all along there, I don't know what else we're living for. That's the quality of life you want for everybody. So if we can put those pieces together all over South Knoxville, and for that matter, every community in Knoxville, the big shiny stuff helps, but that's the day-to-day 99% of your life stuff. That's the good stuff.
All right.
Well, let's take another, we still have time, take another walk across that pedestrian bridge, at least metaphorically.
Okay.
To Cumberland Avenue, Fort Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of construction going on along Cumberland. It's transforming Cumberland Avenue. And what are you hearing from business owners and people who live over there about those changes and what they might mean for the Fort Sanders /UT area?
You mentioned the most densely populated part of the city, and it is true. So, more humans and more places to sleep are challenging. UT's increased enrollment significantly, been very successful at that. I wish they increased housing at the same rate. It takes a little longer apparently to build rooms than it does to convince 18-year-olds to come live here. But I think some of the old businesses that were around for 2 and 3 decades decided just it was an end of an era, and they were going to kind of move on and close the doors. Others have found new homes in the new buildings. So I think some of the developers have been very good about giving former tenants the option to exist in the new shape. It is definitely the end of an era in terms of building scale design. So I guess at the same time, one of the biggest factors to our housing crunch is the thousands of new students that are coming here every year that are above and beyond what the housing market was used to. So I have to remind everybody that students are constituents too, and we want them to live here and create things here and stay and be. And so it is a very tough tension between new faces, new activity. And in fact, if you go down Sevier Avenue, one of the things that's always, I think when people think of students, they think of like 1990s Fort scene on a Friday night. I don't think that's at least the student scene I see on Sevier Avenue. And if you are on Sevier Avenue, you see this a gorgeous mix of families, young professionals, retirees, and 22-year-old students. And I imagine that's the kind of mix you're going to see on the west side of Chapman, kind of to bring us full circle. But, Cumberland is its own kind of corridor world now, I guess, for students. And I guess the students are like that. So I know that there's some heartburn from folks who used to frequent there for lunch and dinner, and just hard to kind of make your way in there and do that, including myself.
Yeah, well, this is a reason not to live in your college town, right? When I go back to visit my college town, it's all changed. Every place I used to go is all gone.
Yeah.
The danger is because, everybody's college experience is those 4 or however many years that you're there. And that's just that little snapshot you have. But that's the way everybody wants to remember it. But we should probably go ahead and wrap up there. A lot going on in your district, Tommy.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have. I mean, people want to come live in every corner of the first district, and I'm happy to have them. And I'm trying to bridge the gap between folks that have been around a long time and folks that are new because of this and are coming because of the same reasons we all live there. So it's a happy place. We got to make room for everybody and remember the folks that have been here.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all. I really appreciate the time.
All right. Well, thanks again to Tommy for giving us a little bit of time. A lot going on down there in South Knoxville. Okay, let's look ahead to next week. Starting with Scott, we have already mentioned it a couple of times, but what is happening on Tuesday?
Rumor has it that's election day.
Ooh.
And polls will be open 8 to 8. So
for that flood of people who we are expecting.
I know there will be a couple of precincts that will get one voter an hour, maybe. The UT precincts usually don't vote very. 1 or 2 people.
Hard to get the students interested in the local elections.
But anyway, for those who do want to vote on election day, who haven't already voted, I count myself among them because I prefer waiting to election day to join in the community ritual of voting. And the polls will be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. after the polls close, the results will be usually take within an hour or so. You start getting the early voting results. They post those, and then a couple hours, you've got the rest of them. So
yeah, if it is a low turnout, maybe at least we get the numbers earlier rather than later. But
well, you know, the thing about it is early vote, heavy vote. I mean, light vote, heavy vote. What matters is them getting the computer card out of the voting machine, which is the same no matter how many people vote, and getting it to the election commission, to the computer that reads the vote, the card, and that's, you know, that takes the same amount of time no matter what. So
right, because they are actual physical cards that have to be taken out of each machine and brought down, and that is an election security measure, because people talk about, you know, being able to get in and hack the results, and you can't do that because these machines are not, in fact, connected to the internet. They're not connected to each other. They are individual machines. And
the machine they use to count the votes is not connected to the internet, or, you know, it's I think they've got some guy over there on a bicycle that
right.
on a stationary bicycle that wheels it, so it's not even plugged into the wall. It's plugged into the bicycle. That's what I hear anyway.
Well, we will
sources
obviously have coverage of the outcomes of those elections. Some interesting races there, as we were just talking about. School board is meeting next week. They're having their monthly work session on Monday and their regular meeting on Thursday, both of those at 5 p.m. in the Summer Place boardroom. Not a very stacked agenda in terms of obviously controversial items. I think the most interesting thing on it, they are supposed to be voting on their charter agreement with the new Knoxville Preparatory Charter School that is going to be opening next fall. It's going to be an all-boys school that will be occupying the Boys and Girls Clubs building in North Knoxville. And the charter agreement basically sets out the expectations, accountability measures, and so forth for the charter school. A lot of that is set by state law. The local district doesn't have a whole lot of say in kind of what they can measure or expect or demand from that school, but they do have to have an actual legal agreement. That is, when we talk about a charter school, the charter is what is given. It's the authorization given to them by the local district or by the state to actually operate the school. So that's what the school board is going to be looking at. Wednesday, the Knox County Ethics Committee is going to be meeting at 8:30 a.m. in the main assembly room of the City County building. There is not anything, again, obviously controversial on the agenda for that meeting, but the one thing that may be there, and we will see, we talked back in September, there was this ethics complaint filed against County Commissioner Kyle Ward having to do with a real estate deal in West Knox County. And at the time, back in September, the ethics committee didn't take any action on that complaint, but they left it open for the complainant to basically submit further detail or more specificity about any violations they think occurred. Unclear if that has happened. So I guess we'll just see if anything more comes of that this coming Wednesday. And then on Thursday, Scott, the Knox County Planning Commission is having its monthly meeting.
Yeah, the Planning Commission is going to meet at 1:30 p.m. in the main assembly room of the City County building, as they do every month. Is the agenda right now? It looks like most of the it's kind of a routine number of subdivision requests, plans, approvals, requests, those kinds of things. There's one kind of interesting thing that's on the agenda that is it's not earth shattering, and but it does kind of show you that sometimes you can't write zoning regulations in anticipation of every situation, and this kind of illustrates that. It's a property owner in South Knoxville, Maryville Pike, near Woodson Road. And the owner of this property, which has a kind of warehouse kind of building on it, wants to convert it into a dog training facility. and it would have up to I believe 32 dogs a day would be there. They could board 18 overnight. That's the plan anyway. So they wanted to do all this. It's a warehouse building. It's zoned for general business use, but these dog training facilities are not allowed in just regular business zone, the regular business commercial zone. And it's not allowed as a use on review either. So there's no way it can be approved unless the planning commission basically, throws it all out and approves the use on it, which is what the planning staff recommends, because it is a warehouse building. There aren't, it's not there's no really good reason for it not to be there except that it's not allowed. So we'll see what the planning commissioners actually do on that. But it's just kind of those little hey Martha things that you run across every now and then that you don't realize that, hey, if I wanted to run a dog training business, why can't you do it in a commercial zone? I don't know, but you can't, and unless the planning commission looks the other way and lets you do it. So, well,
maybe there will be some sort of condition put on it about cleaning up after the animals, making
knows?
Sure that everything gets properly bagged and disposed of.
Yeah, for what we know so far, the only thing is the planning staff thinks that it would be okay to make this exception to the rule.
All right. Well, we will be back next week to talk about all of those things and whatever else happens in the interim. As always, thanks to Lord Seth Barber, our producer here at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we'll talk to you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.